Hi everybody, I'm back here today with Preston Dennett. We're going to do another fantastic UFO chat today. Thanks for coming along, Preston.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thought we'd talk about UFOs visiting children in schoolyards today, because you've done a fantastic book about that as well. And I've seen you talk about this before, and it kind of hit home for me a little bit. So I wondered what brought you into finding out about schoolyards. Was it something that happened in your own experience, or how did it all start?
Well, I heard about a very famous case in Zimbabwe, the Ariel Elementary School, where a UFO landed next to the playground. Some 200 children were on the playground. At least 60 students saw this. Figures came out of this craft and communicated with some of the students. And I thought, wow, this is truly an incredible encounter. But I honestly thought it was unique. I really did. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered reading about another account and started looking for it. And I found it. It was in Wales, actually, the Broadhaven Elementary School, where something very similar happened. Some 15 students saw a UFO, landed right next to the school. ETs came out. I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. And I started to look into it more deeply.
Was it the
Wondering,
same kind of UFOs, do you think, or were they different? They always described different.
yeah, it was different. Um, so yeah, that kind of was curious to me too. I'm like, are these the same beings? Are these the same craft? And as I started to look into it, I'm like, I expected to find a few cases, but I found a lot. There's some very famous, I think, say there's 5 or 6 really well-known cases. There was a case in Australia at Westall High School where a UFO landed next to the school. Hundreds of children saw it, teachers saw it. And I knew of another case in Florida, Crestview Elementary School in Opelika, Florida. Again, a UFO landed next to the school. And so, yeah, that's when I started to dig deep, because I had had a few cases myself. One guy I had interviewed had been basically abducted from the playground and had missing time. He didn't really remember what happened other than he missed recess. So yeah, that's what started me looking into it. And I expected, like, hey, this might be a fun research project. I'll find maybe 5 or 10 cases. I found over 100, stretching back at least to 1950. I actually found a few cases earlier than that, but starting in 1950 is when it really kicked off. And pretty much every year after that, there would be these cases of UFOs hovering over schoolyards or landing. So yeah, that's how I got sort of started into it.
I'd never really heard about all this until I saw your book, and then I heard you talking about it on another show. And for me, when you was talking about it, something strange started happening. I started thinking, this seems familiar, but I couldn't, like, I don't know if it did happen to me as a child, because I can't seem to bring it out, whatever it was that I was trying to remember. I really felt this niggling. So these people that you've interviewed, for example, that man, is it something they then forgot about and then it came out later when they were an adult or something?
No, generally speaking, uh, these witnesses remember the incident right after it happens and think about it every day of their lives. This has a huge impact on them. I am sure there are cases where people have had their memory blocked of it, because that does turn up in a few cases, but generally, no. At least the cases that I found, uh, yeah, they remember it as it's happening, and I think part of it is because uh, they're this is not an isolated experience for them. There are a lot of people who are watching these things. It's as a rule, what I would say an average of 30, 40 students who witness this at a time.
And even their
Sometimes,
teachers see them, don't they?
Yep. I looked that up because people are like, oh, it's just kids. They're imaginative. They've got playmates, imaginary playmates. They're very impressionable. I'm like, well, hold on a second here. It's not just one student. It is the teachers. In more than half the cases, teachers do see this stuff, and which is very significant because teachers are well educated. That's their job. So I think that provides definitely a really good level of credibility to these cases.
But I wonder if the teachers are kind of told not to discuss it because they're supposed to be teachers, and shouldn't be, saying about this kind of, what would they call it, woo-woo or something.
Yeah, that does happen, and that they do try to cover it up in a number of cases. Actively cover it up and tell the students not to talk. It doesn't always work. These cases are very unusual. I started analyzing them. I'm like, wow, these are not your average sightings. This is not just kids out in the playground looking up and a UFO flies by. It's not a random event at all. What I found is that in these cases, the schools are specifically targeted. And by that, I mean, a UFO will appear way high up in the sky or off on the horizon, and it drops down or heads directly for the school itself and comes to a very low level. We're talking maybe a couple of 100 feet on the upper end, and often much lower than that, 20 feet, or landing. They land in 30% of the cases.
Oh, that's a high
Humanoids.
percentage.
Right. And another weird thing I found was these are relatively long lasting. The average sighting is just a few moments, seconds even. Many of these cases take, 5 minutes would be the shorter end, but half hour, an hour, 2 hours, over a period of days even. And here's another really interesting thing. I'm like, okay, what kinds of schools are these visiting? Over half are elementary schools. Yeah, there are, junior high, high schools, and colleges who are experiencing this, but half of them are elementary schools, our youngest children, which I think is significant and probably intentional on the ET's part, because children are great witnesses. They don't know what a UFO is. They have no fear, prejudice, or prior experience with this. Many of them have never even heard of the term UFO. So they show no real fear in most cases. So I think it's sort of a clever way for the ETs to sort of, convince people of their presence while sort of sliding under the radar there and not causing a huge wave in mainstream society.
Yeah, because that is young children, isn't it? And I'm wondering also if, like you say, they've got no prejudices about it or any probably fear. So they're probably, I would like to think that I'd run out. Oh, what's this? And perhaps at first they think it's the military or something coming to visit. But then when an alien being comes out of that craft, I don't know whether they're humanoid, most of them, or what. Is there a certain type that are in these visits?
All different types. You've got some classic grays, I guess you would call them, typical grays. But you have tall humanoids, light beings, short little midget humanoids, and really just a wide variety. People often do describe very large eyes and bald heads. That does turn up quite a bit. Jumpsuited figures. But by and large, it's humanoids. Short humanoids, I'd say, would be the most common description.
I wonder how they'd introduce themselves. And maybe this is what people used to mistake for fairies and pixies and things. Hi, I'm an alien. They're not going to say that to a little child, I don't think. I just wonder how it all goes for them, how the conversation goes between them all. Because you said some of them talk to them.
Yeah, I looked into the whole fairy lore because I'm, generally speaking, I've looked into that years earlier because of some amazing parallels. I don't think that fairies are ETs or ETs are fairies. I think we're probably dealing with a separate phenomena. Lots of interdimensional creatures on our planet, lots of spiritual creatures and nature spirits, and so to speak. I am not sure that these phenomena can all be lumped together in a real cohesive way. I think, yeah, ETs are what they appear to be, extraterrestrials, beings from other planets, beings like us, but not from here, from elsewhere. And yeah, messages aren't super common. In the Rua, Zimbabwe case, boy, what a case. That was 1994, mid-November. And some of the students did run to get the teachers, but by coincidence, they were all in the school having a supervisory meeting. There was one adult on the playground, and some kids ran up to her. She was minding the snack stand. And she says, just get away from me. No, I don't believe you. Go play. And she regrets it now, not taking the students seriously. But she says, well, I couldn't really exactly just leave the snack stand unattended. But this is what we
ploy to get the sweets.
right. So often the teachers will miss this. I mean, that's what happened in the Broadhaven case. Students went running to tell the teachers, and the teachers are like, I don't believe you. But the students were so traumatized, so clearly telling the truth, that they ended up separating all of them and having them draw little pictures of what they saw. And it's astonishing to see these pictures because they show details that are identical, that so much so that it's clear these students are not lying. And none of them, by the way, have ever retracted their stories. In fact, in the Broadhaven case, they have, I'm not sure if it's annual, but they have reunions where they come back as adults and talk about what happened. And this happened at the Rosie Ball School, which was also in Wales, I believe. This is worldwide. I found cases in Canada, across the US, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Africa, of course, all across Europe, many cases in England, New Zealand.
So all the continents.
Yeah, I didn't find any cases in Russia but UFO information is from Russia is hard to get a hold of.
Yes, they're very quiet about it, aren't they? What goes on? But I do know things do go on because I know people from Russia that say things. So, for example, with the Zimbabwe one, do you know what kind of craft it was? Was it like one of these little flying saucer ones, 3 legs, come down, not revolving, a escalator type door? What are they like?
Yeah, it was sort of your classic flying saucer. According to the students, there was more than one. They came traveling down above the electric lines and circled around the school and landed just outside of the school playground. And 3 beings came out. One stood on top of the craft, one stood next to it, and one approached the students. And some students were within a couple of feet of this figure, who stared at them and telepathically communicated with them and gave them all messages, or at least 10 students or so received messages, which is so interesting because the messages were all very similar and had to do with the environment, our planet. One girl was told that we need to stop cutting down our forests because we need them to keep the air clean. Another was warned about pollution. One girl, she was told that our use of technology has gotten out of control, that there's a good way to use technology and a bad way, and we could do much better, that we've become far too technological and are destroying our planet, and will destroy our planet if we're not careful.
I like these aliens. I agree with them full-heartedly.
Yeah, and mind you, this is 1994 in a very rural area of Africa where environmentalism was not, a hot subject. Certainly not like it is today.
That is a strange place to leave them kind of messages. You'd think they'd do them more, not saying it in a bad way, but in a way that is more that kind of thing's going on, where they could get the message out there. Yeah, that is strange to say it there.
Yeah, well, I think they've done it to our leaders. Honestly, I do think UFOs have landed at Air Force bases, and ETs have communicated with leaders of heads of state, people very high in the military, and talked about these same issues. But our governments, our militaries are not truthful or transparent or forthcoming. They hide this information. And I think for that reason, primarily, this is why the ETs decided, okay, we're going to have to go roundabout. We're going to do a grassroots movement, and we're going to influence society in a very sneaky way. And we're going to let the youth know what's going on, because these youngsters are the one who are going to be running our planet in 20 years or so.
Yes.
And this is exactly what we're seeing. So now we do have a very strong environmental awareness and environmental movement, and a very, very strong belief, particularly among our younger generations, in UFOs.
So maybe they were subconscious by doing that all them years ago, 1994, and the ones that were before that were getting it ready for, like you say, for this time, because we are getting to a crisis point, I think, ecologically. I know many people poo-poo me about this, but, you know, something's got to be done. So that's a great message for them to be bringing. And is that the majority would have them kind of messages? Because, you know, you're saying about there's been hundreds of UFOs landing at schools. Is that the majority of the message?
Well, there's not a whole lot of messages in the children's cases. That's certainly the primary message when adults are taken on board. And yeah, that does turn up in a few cases. One lady I interviewed, she got a different message. She was at a Catholic high school in Mentor, Ohio, and out on the playground, which is, you know, how this always happens. I don't think that's a coincidence. And this UFO drops down out of the sky, and her friends pointed out to her. They're like, look, look. And she and her friends watched this silvery object drop down out of the sky and sort of land in this grove of trees next to the school. This is how they always do it. They find a little copse of trees and land right in them. And she got a very clear message, telepathic English. It said, remember this day. And she was like staring at this thing when it took off like a bullet. She says, if you were not looking at it, you would not have seen it. And in her case, no, nobody talked about it. They pretty much forgot. She was the only one who really remembered. And I think it's because of that message. So I think ultimately what they're doing here is it's an announcement of their presence. It's a way to say, hi, we're real. I think that's their primary agenda, is to just let kids know that UFOs are real, that there's other beings out there.
Because you were saying earlier about the Pentagon and the governments and that get visitors. You know, one of my favorite stories is Valiant 4. Do you have anything to say about Valiant 4 and his stay at the Pentagon?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, isn't it? I did talk to Frank Stranges personally.
Oh, wow.
And I have to tell you, he was one of the few people within the UFO field who welcomed me warmly and with open arms. There was more politics than I had hoped in this field, which I think is true in any field. There's, you know, power struggles and jealousies and all of this. And I came into this field pretty naive. I was a very young man. I was like, what, 21, 22 when I began investigating. But he was just the nicest guy, very warm, very caring. And I felt that he was absolutely sincere. So that alone makes me really think there might be something to the Valiant Thor story. I obviously don't have any proof of it, but I know of other very similar accounts where government have met with ETs. I mean, there's the famous 1954 incident at Edwards Air Force Base where President Eisenhower allegedly met with ETs.
He thought they were Russians, didn't he? Because they were kind of Nordic looking. Is that right? He thought they were Russians or something like that. You carry on and tell the story.
No, I hadn't heard that, but I do know that this was immediately covered up, and leaks of this incident, whistleblowers started coming out immediately. 2 or 3 people who were there or had heard about it told the story, and I think initially it was disbelieved. But as researchers looked into it, more and more information started to come out confirming it. And now many, many researchers take this incident very seriously. And at the time, President Eisenhower was supposed to be on a golf tournament and he disappeared and the press couldn't find him and they were going crazy. And one newspaper said, oh, he had a heart attack and died. And they printed this and retracted it, obviously, when he reappeared and said, no, it was just an emergency dental appointment. Well, researchers looked into that too. They actually tracked down the dentist, and there was no dental appointment.
He was busy meeting ETs. But I think they were also giving him an environmental warning, but they were also quite concerned about the use of atomic bombs again, weren't they? And that splitting the atom, we shouldn't be doing that because it's affecting other dimensions. And as you were saying before, some of these ETs could be coming from other dimensions. So if there's a roll-on effect through these dimensions, they're going to be concerned, aren't they?
Yeah, this seems to be what really started the modern age of UFOs, which began in 1947 with the Kenneth Arnold and this huge super wave which spread across the world, and Roswell and other UFO crashes. And that coincides exactly with the atomic age, when we were really exploding all kinds of nuclear bombs, test-wise and otherwise. And apparently, yeah, it is causing waves in other dimensions. This is what the ETs have said. That's what came out in the Eisenhower meeting, but actually turns up in a number of firsthand contactee cases. It's probably the #1 warning against nuclear proliferation. So they're clearly very concerned about nuclear weapons. And in fact, wherever we have nuclear materials of any kind, they're there, whether it's a nuclear submarine, a nuclear ship, nuclear power bases, missiles of any kind. Many incidents have occurred over these types of areas because they are watching them very closely and are very concerned and keep telling us, what are you doing? You don't understand. This is extremely dangerous.
I wonder why they don't actually go to the scientists, or maybe they do, and the scientists are keeping quiet about it. You know, the ones that are looking into all this and discovering all this atomic weaponry and what they can do with the atom.
Yeah. Oh, they do go to scientists. I know some, at least one NASA guy, he's kept quiet about his contacts, but he told me, and I know that there are people within government and military at very high levels. I think they're contacting people at every level of society. And because, yeah, our governments and our leaders are not being forthcoming and truthful, this is why they're really going to individuals and taking them on board. They are contacting people who are influential in society. So we're seeing a lot of musicians being contacted, a lot of teachers, writers, entertainers, people who are really doing good work for humanity in any capacity, inventors, doctors. These are the police officers. Very high incidence of contactees among these types of people in these professions. And it was really the one pattern I could really pin down as to who's being contacted and why, because it's evenly divided between men and women. It's all over the world. I mean, people are contacted when they're very young or very old, or it's not blood type, I can tell you that. I've talked to people of every, well, I don't want to say every race, but, you know, Black people, Asian, Native American, Latino. All of these people are having contact. So it's, you know, not race or blood type. It's not religion. It's not education. It is really everybody, but there does seem to be a high incidence among like social workers or environmentalists, this sort of thing.
So it's kind of like, in a way, contacting all these people. Hopefully they will do something to get it out into the rest of the world's consciousness of what we're doing needs to change, how we live needs to change, which I suppose is kind of happening now,
Yeah.
hopefully for the better. But at the same time, we're still fighting against the people that want to stay with, who don't have a heart for the environment, or are too busy on the technological side of taking us into the future of AI and whatever technocracy is coming.
Yeah, I mean, a good example is John Lennon, the musician John Lennon of the Beatles, who did have a very close-up sighting and perhaps more extensive contact, and was influenced by his sighting enough to put it in his song, or UFOs over New York, and I ain't too surprised. And he was a huge peace activist and very influential. And now we have more and more musicians coming forward. I think Demi Lovato, Miley Cyrus, Tom DeLonge, who are stepping forward. I'm
Isn't
still
he
waiting.
part of is it SSP? I forgot what it's called.
Yeah, To the Stars.
To the Stars, that's it.
Yeah. And
so are you involved with that at all, or can you tell us a bit about To the Stars? I don't really, because being in Britain, we didn't really have much coverage of what that was all about.
Yeah, well, I'm not involved in a personal level, but when Tom DeLonge, who is of Blink 182, a pretty successful musical group, I remember he came forward several years ago and says, I've had contact. And I'm like, yay, oh my gosh, here's someone who has a platform, and I always keep my eye out when someone who is a celebrity comes forward. And I'm like, okay, maybe he'll have an influence on this field. And I was delighted when he made this a primary mission in his life and put forth an enormous amount of time, money, and energy, and formed the To the Stars Academy, and actually gathered some governmental people and started pushing forward on this disclosure movement. Actually, helped get this whole Pentagon disclosure sort of rolling forward. I'm not saying he's solely responsible, but he definitely played a powerful role. And I'm pretty excited about it because we've had almost zero movement within official government, announcing in any official capacity that UFOs are real. It's always, no, it's not real. It's no threat to national security. Go away. We're not interested in UFOs. Shut up. And for decades, I mean, not a single governmental body would say anything nice about UFOs. And the last 3 years, I think we're getting some actual movement. It's baby steps, mind you. And I'm kind of annoyed, and I think it's a little bit disingenuous to, march forth a pilot and show this sort of, I mean, it's good footage, the Pentagon footage and the Tic Tac footage, but they have much better footage, much better. I mean, they filmed that Eisenhower UFO landing. That was caught on film. And they've got gun camera footage of jets chasing these things. They have very, very clear footage. There was a UFO that landed at Edwards. Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, saw the footage. Our government has that, and they haven't released that. What did they release? This sort of dark image of this little UFO darting across, so it's disingenuous. It's sort of saying, look, here's this piece of footage. I'm like, shut up, right behind the curtain there. I know you have the actual alien bodies. I know you have the craft. So while I appreciate, that you're saying that we have, quote, material from otherworldly vehicles, I know you have far more than that.
Because it all comes back down to everyone's always like, oh, they say it's because we're not ready for it. But I think most of the world is. Everybody's been watching Star Trek and things like that, or know something of it. I think most of the world is ready for this kind of information. It just seems like, why are they being like this? And in my own research, I see that, like you were saying, a lot of them come with these environmental messages, don't they? And I heard that Eisenhower and the president when Valiant 4 was there, I've forgotten, was that Eisenhower or Roosevelt? Anyway, they didn't like it because it would affect the economy. And you think, oh, that's a bit of a weird reason if they're coming with ways of making things better for us. I believe Valiant 4 came with technology as well, but president wouldn't take it. I know the vice president was Nixon. That's all I can remember. But
Yeah, Nixon, all the presidents have had some exposure to this. Nixon apparently was in the loop and did see the alien bodies, which he showed to Jackie Gleason, according to Jackie Gleason's wife. So yeah, I'm guessing many of our presidents and heads of state across the world know all about this. And with the Eisenhower meeting, yeah, the ETs were warning us against nuclear proliferation, and we're like, no, we're moving forward with it. Can you give us technology? And they're like, no, you need spiritual training. That's what you need. You need to disclose. And we're like, no, we don't want to disclose because it will upset our economy and religions, which I think there probably would be a little bit of upheaval, as there always is when anything major happens. But we're a very adaptable species. We've gone through enormous changes over just the last 100 years even. And I think
absolutely. Yeah, because even the Pope said that, you know, aliens are made by God, didn't he? He was saying that, you know, we can help
yeah,
them with Christ if they don't already know of Christ.
yeah, the Vatican has made several statements about ETs. And I think if there was sort of a full disclosure or open official contact by the ETs, one or the other, or both, because I think both are coming. We're going to have disclosure because it's the truth and you can't hold the truth forever. And the UFOs are not going away. There has been a slow but steady escalation of contact. So sooner or later, we're going to have full disclosure and open official contact. And I think the section of society that's going to be hardest hit are people who are fundamental religions, people within, you know, who have a very rigid thinking about, you know, religion to explain society and spirituality. And I think it will be difficult for a small segment of the population who believe perhaps that UFOs are demonic in origin, because some people do hold that belief. I looked deeply into it too because of this. I mean, I had to study demonology, which, you know, I didn't really want. The evil spirits, I did not want to get into that, but I did. I studied ghosts intently, angels, demons. I studied all of this to see if could this explain UFOs, and no, it doesn't. Yes, I think probably there is evil spirits and demons and terrible hauntings, and I've investigated firsthand some of these really dark hauntings, but they're not UFOs. They're not ETs. It's a separate phenomena. There is a spiritual world. We'll all go there when we die. People are varying levels of spiritual evolution, and there are spirits out there who are not evolved. And I think that's what we're looking at in some of these demonic cases. But no, I don't think UFOs are demonic. And I think religion is going to be hard hit when all this comes out. But it's about time because religion is, I think, losing its sway over the populace. Several hundred years ago, it was really the primary mode of thought until, you know, science really kind of took over and the pendulum swung to the far end of materialism, which isn't accurate either. So now we're sort of swinging back to sort of a more accurate understanding of our universe, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I think religion lost its spirituality and became organizations, didn't they? And I think that's why in the late 1800s, people like Blavatsky and Steiner and Gurdjieff and others like them turned up, trying to remind people there's more to your religious beliefs than just an organization and religion, and tried to bring spirituality back. And that's why we had the New Age kind of wave, wasn't it? So
Yeah,
I wonder if this is what the aliens given these messages are trying to say. Maybe our governments are just not spiritual enough. The people running them, they don't have that conscience of how to, what am I trying to
exactly.
say? Yeah, you know, like
Yeah,
having a conscience is an important part of spirituality, isn't it? You need a conscience to know right and wrong and know
precisely.
everything.
This is something, this is a primary agenda of the extraterrestrials. It really is. When someone is taken on board, they're physically examined, perhaps reproductive materials are used. There is an agenda there. They're very interested in human physiology, genetics, perhaps revitalizing their race, particularly the Greys. They're also very interested in warning us about nuclear proliferation and pollution and our overuse of fossil fuels and this sort of thing. They're very concerned about our environment. But beyond that, they are very interested in waking people up spiritually. This is a very consistent feature of extensive contact. People who are taken on board a UFO come away from their experiences spiritually transformed. They are woken up. They start learning about past lives. They start learning about hands-on healing and Reiki, channeling, psychic readings, astral travel, all these sort of things that we would think of as maybe even like superhuman abilities are actually normal human talents. This is something we all have the ability to do, telepathy and this sort of thing. And that's what they really, I think, are trying to wake people up to the fact that we are all connected. We are all one. We are all part of this amazing universe. And we have these incredible abilities that we've only begun to tap into.
Absolutely. Do you think, going back to the schoolyards, like as a child, if I'd seen something like that, my first thought would be, is it an angel? You know, did the children perhaps think it was that kind of thing, like an angelic being?
No, that doesn't really turn up in a whole lot of these cases, because what children are seeing is a metallic craft.
Right.
And often the teachers are there, and like here's, oh gosh, one of my favorite cases took place in New Zealand at Richmond School. There was 400 kids on the playground and a couple of teachers, and suddenly one of the teachers noticed that all the sounds of the kids playing had stopped. No one was, shouting and screaming and laughing and running around. And he looks around him and sees that all the kids are staring up. And he looks up and gets a huge shock. There's a very, very large saucer-shaped object with a sort of glistening silver black surface approaching the school. And it is so large that it takes up a good portion of the sky. I mean, it covers the entire school. And everyone's just staring up at it. And one of the students comes up to the teacher, is like, "Is that a UFO, mister?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think it is." And it stayed there for about 15 minutes and finally moved off to the side, turned up on its side and darted off. And there was an airport nearby. They called up the airport. No one there saw it. This came for the children. And it did the same type of behavior they always do. They come real low and make it super obvious for everyone there that this is us. Here we are, hello. And once they have everyone's attention, that's when they take off.
If you hypnotized one of these children when they're an adult or something, did many of them give results of what actually something else happened and everyone was kind of, time stopped, or is it just the sighting?
It appears to be, in most cases, just a sighting, but not in all cases. And I do wonder about that, because there is a sense of timelessness and a weird sort of, there could be missing time in some of these cases. That certainly happened in the Mentor, Ohio case that I mentioned earlier, where the student got the message, "Remember this day." She says, as she was watching this thing, time seemed to stop. And that's what happened at another incident, a very early one in 1952 in Scotland, actually, at Elder Park Elementary School. A bunch of school had just let out. These ETs know what they're doing. They were waiting for school to let out, and suddenly one of the students, her name was Joan. She saw this circular shadow sort of playing on the field coming towards them, and everyone was suddenly quiet and everyone stopped still and started looking up, and she looks up and there's this huge metallic craft shaped like a sombrero hat, is how she described it. Many teachers saw this, and this thing came over the school and it stopped right over the school building itself, right above the steeple, about 50 feet up. and was just sort of rocking back and forth and spinning and stayed there for, she says she's not sure how long, because she had this weird sense of time stopping or just timelessness. And she doesn't know how long it was there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But at some point it sort of made this low buzzing noise, started spinning a little faster, tilted and darted off over Glasgow, where it was seen by a number of adults and got into the newspaper the next day. It was funny because a lot of the students went home and like, oh, I saw a UFO, mommy, I saw a UFO, daddy, and were not believed. And then it came out the next day in the newspapers, and the students got their revenge when it turned out a lot of people had actually seen this. And again, here's this type of behavior, which we now know is a display. Generally speaking, UFOs are evasive. They don't show themselves off daily over major city centers. You can't just go out and see a UFO anytime you want. But in these schoolyard cases, they want to be seen. There's no way around this. They are coming so low and putting on a little show for these students, and showing themselves to large groups of people. There is nothing like this in the literature out there. They are not showing themselves over baseball games and concerts and this sort of thing, outdoor venues. There are a few, mind you, I did find, because I looked into this, I'm like, maybe they're showing at sports, events. And I did find a soccer game where they came down, and I did find a couple of concerts, but not 100. And mind you, I'm still getting cases. This book came out last year, or actually now it's 2 years. And I'm still getting cases from people. There was a guy in England who said, yeah, this happened to me. It came down right over our school. We all thought it was a plane, but there were no wings. And there was a little window, and we could see this human looking figure inside. I'm like, wow, you're kidding. He's like, no, it was looking down at us. And we were all wondering if it was a plane, but it was perfectly silent. And I got another case in Australia where the teachers freaked out and ushered all the students inside and closed the blinds. And told everyone not to talk about it. Oh man.
Yeah, I suppose, what do you do as a teacher if you saw it? Are you thinking for the safety of the kids, because you don't know what's going to happen? Is this alien attack they're coming, or what? I suppose, I don't know what I would do because I work with children in the sports department, if they're doing football, funnily enough. But if the UFO suddenly come down, I think I would be too busy going, wow,
right.
Then maybe I'd think, right, get the kids in. I would like to think the kids should see it myself.
Yeah.
But if they did start bringing out guns, obviously I'd have to get all the kids in and try and save them. I don't know. They seem to come in peace most of the time, don't they? Or have been. We haven't had any accounts of people being shot to death by a UFO.
No, I mean, there are some negative cases where people have been struck by a beam of light and suffered, radiation burns. There are some scattered cases, absolutely, but I am not afraid of UFOs. I really am not. The people who have had very extensive contact and have overcome their fear report very benevolent contact. I've documented 300 cases of healings. That's definitely a primary agenda, to heal humanity. No kidding. I mean, I'm totally serious. I've got 30 cases of people healed of cancer, and that's the tip of the iceberg. If they wanted to take over, it would be so easy for them.
Yeah.
There's just no way. But I mean, here's a case where I got to interview the witnesses firsthand, because many of these I wasn't able to. But this occurred at Point Pleasant School. This is in, Point Elementary School. But actually, there wasn't one at Point Pleasant. That was West Virginia. But Point Elementary School in St. Louis, Missouri. This occurred on March 1966, which was a big year for schoolyard encounters. And the main witness I talked to, Melody is her name. She was there with her friends. This is an elementary school. And they were out in the playground, and they decided they're not going to play foursquare like all the other students, or ball. They went to the other side of the playground and were playing tag. And they just started to play tag when Melody and there was 5 of them, or 6 of them altogether. they all looked down on the ground and they saw these weird footprints. And they're like, hey, look at these footprints. They're like tiny little human footprints. And they were trying to figure out what it could be because they were bipedal, but they couldn't be human because they were too small. Unless they were little kids, and they were like looking at them, trying to figure out and where they come from and where they were leading to, because they were leading out of the school into the playground and off the playground. And they looked into the trees next to the school, and there was this bright white light flashing. And their first thought was ice cream truck, which is so cute. and I think sort of lends credence to what they're saying, because yeah, I mean, that's the first thing you're going to think when you're a kid. And so they all go look at each other and like, let's go. You're not supposed to walk off school grounds during school, but they did, and they ran off to the trees. And as soon as they got, close to it, they could see that this wasn't an ice cream truck. It was a saucer. It had little landing legs, struts, had a bright white light on top. It was silver, metallic. And they weren't paying too much attention to it because at that point they noticed a humanoid who was about their height, very short, 4 feet tall maybe, and wasn't a gray by any means. It was had dark skin. She said it had a face almost like a gorilla, is what it reminded her of. Was wearing a jumpsuit. It was bald, had very large eyes, and seemed muscular, like a gymnast almost, is how she described it. And all the kids were shocked. They sort of lined up in a little row and stared at this being who was just maybe 20 feet away. And the being locked gazes with them and started backing up and heading towards the craft. And sort of just backed up and was just about to go into the craft when suddenly the teacher arrived. Mrs. Ohlendorf comes up from behind the students and screams, bloody murder, because she could see all this. And she grabs the kids and says, get back inside, and takes them away from the site and pulls them into the school, along with everyone else on the playground who was running towards this as this was happening. And so they didn't get to see the humanoid. Only the students and Mrs. Ohlendorf, the 6 students, saw the humanoid apparently. And they rush everyone back into the classroom. And they all, of course, rush to the windows to see this thing, and which they can still see this craft sort of through the trees. And Miss Ohlendorf starts shutting the blinds as quickly as she can. Says, don't look at it, don't look at it. She closes the blinds and screaming to the other teachers to get the principal. And finally, they take all the students and pull them out of their classrooms and into the gymnasium. And
oh, we've just lost sound just as you said that. Can you still hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
All right, you went off just as you went to say what happened in the gymnasium. The sound went off.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah. So what happened when you got into the gymnasium?
Yeah, all the students were ushered into the gymnasium, and they called the school buses and cut the school day short. And one of the students suddenly shouts out, hey, there it goes, because there were windows in the gymnasium. They were high up. But one of the students says he saw this craft dart off. And yeah, school was cut short that day, which often happens in these cases. It's so interesting. I mean, there was
explain that to the parents. Oh, you've got to come and pick your child up because there's a UFO.
yeah. The parents do find out in a lot of these cases and are concerned, to say the least. And
yeah, because what can you do? It's the big fear about all this, I suppose, for people is what can we do about it? Not a lot.
Yeah. The parents are usually just jealous. They're like, oh, I wish I had seen that. But generally do believe the students because there's so many witnesses.
But that little alien that you was talking about with the children, it sounds like it was a bit startled by the kids because it's trying to get back to its ship. Maybe it wasn't expecting to see anybody.
I don't know. It was out there on the playground, judging from the footprints. And I think that they are, I think when someone sees a UFO, the UFO knows, the ETs know it. They're very telepathic. They're very aware of their environment. And I honestly do think they are showing themselves on purpose. And the reason I say that is because some of these cases are so brazen They are so in your face. Such a clearly a show, like what happened at Marysville, or I mean, in Marysville, Ohio, at Jerome Elementary School. There was some 60 kids on the playground, and this object shows up. It's got little portholes or maybe lights. They couldn't really quite tell, but it was very bright. And one of them says, well, maybe we better get some teachers out here. And they called out the principal, and he came out there and saw this thing, and he says he's never seen anything like it before or since. It was very low, a couple of 100 feet up, and was so bright he couldn't even look at it. At times it would flare up in brightness. And he called out another teacher to look at it. And as soon as she comes running out, this object darts away. But here's where it gets so interesting. It drops this huge volume of this wispy cotton candy spider web-like substance, which we now know, we call it angel hair. It's this sort of, we don't know what it is. It's a wispy spider web-like substance, very much like cotton candy. And it comes out of UFOs very rarely. There's only really a handful of cases when you consider the huge number of sightings. Our angel hair is very rare. And so much of it came out of this UFO, it covered the playground, feet deep. I mean, this was huge volumes of the stuff, so thick, it was covering telephone wires and left a canopy over the road, kind of. And actually was surrounded the school for several miles. The school was clearly the target, and kids were scooping it up and bringing it to the teachers, who were touching it and rolling it up into little balls. And they actually did send a sample to the local newspaper, who sent it off to the Lockbourne Air Force Base nearby. Of course, they never heard back from the Air Force about what this was. But to me, this is a clear display. This is sort of like a calling card, like to really, a little gift almost, to let students know that this is a real phenomenon.
Yeah, I've never heard of this. This is incredible. So it's called, well, we're calling it angel hair, like humans are. But,
yeah, it's well known. Yeah, it's called what do they call it in spun glass? Is what they call it in Italy. Hair de la Vierge, the Virgin Mary hair, is what they call it in angel. Yeah, in France.
So is it glistening? Like, does it glisten? Do you know? Or you?
Yeah, it's a little phosphorescent. It dissolves very quickly. Sometimes when you touch it, it just dissolves and sublimes into the air, but it can last for a period of hours. And researchers have managed to finally gather samples. It's very difficult to do, but there's been enough cases now where they've been able to gather samples and have it scientifically analyzed. And we know what it's made of. It's got weird, it's got boron in it. It's got aluminum. It's got other metals in it. And it appears to be a byproduct of their engines, perhaps. That's the main theory. But I sometimes wonder if they're, expelling it on purpose, because it was precisely 1 year later when an identical incident happened in North Carolina at Whitsitt Elementary School, another elementary school. And this time there was over 100 students on the playground and 2 teachers. There were 6 objects, spherical shaped, metallic, very shiny, which were circling around over the school and dropped huge volumes of this stuff. Really a lot of it. And one adult who was there said it looked very much like cotton candy. Another guy said, the teacher said it reminded him of Christmas decorations. And they did save a sample. They sent it off to a nearby scientific labs, Burlington Labs, who was not able to identify it. And they thought, well, we think it might be spider webs. We don't think it is, but you should probably send it to a biologist, because we think it might be organic. And so that's what they did. They sent the sample to a biologist who said, nope, not spider webs. I can tell you that for sure. The strands are far too uniform. There's no evidence of spiders. If it was in the volumes you're describing, there would be spiders in there. Because spiders do, fly on spider webs through the air.
I've seen it do it.
So that does happen, but no, this is not spider webs. It's funny, in that case, one student reached down and scooped up a bunch of it and actually put it in his mouth and to eat it before the teacher could stop him. And
And he
he
still
spit it.
lives.
He's fine, thank God. But he spit it out and said it tasted salty, was not pleasant tasting. Turned out it's not cotton candy. But it's the only case I know where someone actually ate this stuff. But it's one of 3 or 4 cases involving angel hair over schoolyards, which is significant, I think, because school, the number of angel hair cases is just a few dozen. There's not a whole lot. I think you could probably get 100 cases if you really were to dig in. But there's been hundreds of thousands of sightings. Probably, who am I kidding? Millions of sightings over the last 50, 100 years.
It's
So angel
incredible,
hair,
isn't it? It's just like,
yeah.
When are we going to get the answers? Like, I feel the desperation like you feel. We need the answers. We need to know what's going on. And if the aliens are saying we're not ready spiritually, then we need to, well, not necessarily, well, I'd like to think that maybe we could, people start getting spiritual.
I think we are ready, honestly. And because our governments know that this is real and have from the very beginning. And they've handled it. I mean, and they are hardly more spiritually evolved than your average person. I mean, seriously, people within the military have a military mindset, and it's enemies, them versus us type of thing, which is not super spiritual. So I wonder about that. Like what happened at Westall High School. This is one of the most famous schoolyard incidents. This was April 6th, 1966, at around 11 a.m., 2 or 3 objects showed up over the high school. And 2 of them came landing down right next to the school, right beyond the fence. And some 200-300 students came running up to the fence, and several of them hopped the fence, which you're not supposed to do. But there was this little grove of trees, which students would go to make out or smoke cigarettes or play hooky. It was a popular little hangout spot for the kids. And so group of about a dozen kids, at least, hopped the fence and ran right up to these craft. And according to some, there was 2 landed craft, or at least 1, certainly. And the students surrounded it. They could feel heat coming off of it. It wasn't huge. It was like a small car, featureless, bright, shiny silver, like chrome. And it takes off pretty quick, goes up, turns on its side, which is something that they keep doing. There's these weird commonalities. They land next to the school in a grove of trees, and then they rise up, turn on their side, and dart off. And some 200 students did see the landing traces. So everyone pretty much saw the landing traces. Only a few saw this thing actually landed. But as the students start trickling back to school, this is when the media showed up, was starting to interview students. The police showed up, and the military showed up with military vehicles and soldiers in full uniform and shut this down. Everyone was pulled into the auditorium. The headmaster gave an announcement and said, if you think you saw a UFO, you're sadly mistaken. This was something else, and you're not to talk about it. And anyone who talks about it will get detention. And several students did get detention. Students were brought into the offices and questioned without parents being present by military officials and basically threatened. So this is not legal by any means.
No, it's not. And it just makes you even more like, well, there's something going on, isn't there? And how does that affect them youngsters, as they grow up? Are they going to start thinking, well, I can't trust the government, my teachers, my peers, because they're making me lie?
Oh yeah, this caused waves, and it was effectively squashed, covered up for years. There was a few newspaper articles, and it was the buzz of the town among the students, but there wasn't any real investigation for at least 1 year. James McDonald did eventually come over there. I think it was 2 years, a year later, and interviewed some of the teachers and students. There were planes, by the way, who were following these and circling the school, who were watching this all go on. They contacted the local airport, who denied any knowledge of it, which is patently false. They had to know. They were very close, within a couple of miles. And yeah, now it's Australia's most famous UFO incident of all times. It's their most widely viewed incident. They do have regular reunions. There's a memorial set up on the site where this thing landed. There's been a documentary made. I don't think there's been any books written specifically about this incident, but I believe it's, gosh, what's the guy's name? Shane Hurd? Forget his name. But he is sort of the main investigator who's looking into this and is still interviewing people, and did get confirmation from within government circles that this was a real event. But if you look for like any official documentation, there's nothing. But they know, they absolutely know, because it was precisely 1 year later to the day that this happened again. There's a weird timing incidence to this. It's very much like a book tour, like a concert tour that these ETs are doing. They have this timing down. They're like, okay, we did it Westall in Australia. Now let's go to Opelika, Florida. Crestview Elementary School. It was a year to the day. They did the same darn thing. Exactly. And again, the military showed up and school was let out early. Anyone who had walked to school or rode their bike was allowed to leave, but others had to wait for the buses. But those who left early said the UFOs were still there, and they were surrounded by military personnel with guns who would not let students pass. And like the Westall incident, where this object landed, it left landing traces. They were plowed over immediately after this incident. So
there's no trace.
Yeah, which is so wrong. I mean, that's just so wrong. So I'm very disappointed with how our military and how our governments have handled this situation. They have no right to say, oh, we can handle this, but you can't. I'm like, who do you think you are?
Yeah, I agree with you on that, but it's kind of like we're relying on investigators like yourself and the general public getting it out there into the mass media for everyone to be aware that this is going on, even though the government's trying to shut us up. But I did find it quite weird. Just before you lost sound, I had the army fly over my house. That's why I had to put my thing onto mute, because I'm flying quite low as well. So I don't know if they're onto us, Preston.
Oh, yeah, hey, that's really no joke. I mean, I know you're only half joking, really.
Because I don't normally have things like that flying over my house.
Because I have had weird things happen. I mean, I did have one guy once call me up and threaten me, some military guy. No joke, that very early on in my research. He's like, you're barking up the wrong tree. UFOs are dangerous. You don't know what you're getting into. You should get out of this. And it was a clear threat. And I have had what I think is phone tapping. And certainly my mail has come back opened back in the days before internet. And I've had internet problems as well, and email. Yeah, I've had military approach me. So I'm pretty sure UFO researchers are watched pretty closely.
Yes, I think so too. And they probably are trying to put you off doing it, but thankfully you don't, and others don't either. But, if it was the wrong kind of person, could be, frightened off by this kind of thing or having that kind of threat.
Yeah, I'm not interested in revealing government secrets. I'm not, or anything that's super duper sensitive. But I don't think that this is something that they can successfully keep secret. And I think now we're at the point that they can't. And that's why we're seeing disclosure, because it has reached a point where if our government and governments across the world do not disclose, they will lose all credibility. People will not look to them for leadership or knowledge. And that's the point we're at. People don't believe our government anymore.
Yeah.
They're liars. They have been caught lying too many times. So we're losing control of this whole situation. And that's why we're seeing disclosure. Because if they don't, they will lose complete control and we will look to elsewhere. That's what's happening right now.
Yeah, but maybe we need that. Maybe we need that kind of, it's not quite a revolution kind of thing, but it would be a revolution in a peaceful way, hopefully, because we do need governments that we can trust, and we do need to know what's going on in our lives. There must be some parents out there that must be quite worried that a UFO was seen at their children's school. They want, and they don't know who to turn to if they're being told to be quiet about it by the military.
Yeah, there was one case where it's very interesting. A student came home and told his parents that a UFO had followed him home from the school, and they did not believe him. And he's like, I think it's going to take me. And they didn't believe him. They thought he was just lying or
Yeah,
joking or
making it up.
misperceiving. And he ran away. He drained a bank account of a couple of $100 and left a note on the table saying, I'm sorry, they're coming to get me. I have to go. And they called the police, and they called a UFO researcher, Larry Fawcett, I think. No, Leonard Stringfield. That's right. They called Leonard Stringfield, because it turned out the kid had called Leonard Stringfield and left a message, but Leonard Stringfield wasn't home at the time. And they called him up and like, where's our kid? And he's like, I don't know. I mean, what happened? And they told him what happened. And they found the kid at the Atlanta airport. I believe it was in Georgia. This is in Georgia. And the kid was planning on taking a flight away. And they brought him back home, and they brought the UFO researcher in. And the kid described how a year earlier, he had seen a UFO hovering over his high school playground. Everyone saw it, and he felt it was coming for him. He was scared it was going to take him away. And that night, he was visited by humanoids in his bedroom who said, don't be afraid, but you need to come with us. And I believe he was taken. He doesn't really remember what happened after that. So when he had a repeat visitation a year later, he was pretty much convinced that he was about to be abducted, and that's why he ran away. So yeah, some of these students, it's more than just a sighting. For example, in the Rua, Zimbabwe case, a small handful of students continued to have encounters following this incident with gray type ETs, incidentally.
All right, okay.
So it was sort of an introduction to this phenomena, and maybe that's why they're coming, is to choose students to, but I don't know, because that doesn't turn up in most cases. Usually it's just a sighting.
Yeah, so that poor kid was one of a few, one of the rare cases, but then he must be, mentally, it must affect him what's going on. Obviously, that's why he wanted to run away. But then to be, you don't know how the general public are going to treat him, or maybe people say, oh, he's just a bit nuts, and then he's got to go through his life with that on him, that tag on him. It's just like, oh, that's why we need to have it more revealed, like you say, disclosure, so that it can be understood more and accepted more.
Yeah. This is a very important subject, and I think it has the potential to change society, and for our government to cover it up using our own tax dollars really makes me angry.
Well, I've seen we're coming up to an hour, so I wanted to thank you very much, Preston. I've been watching your YouTube channel, so everybody do check in Preston's YouTube shows. Brilliant, the shows you do on that. And just give everybody your website for your contacts and books and things. What's your website?
Hey, I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. It's if you just Google my name, it should take you there, but the actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. And all my books are there, excerpts. You can purchase the book through the website or on, Amazon or other online retailers. And you can also contact me through my website if you have a story you want to share or a question or whatever. Yeah, I love this subject. I'm going to continue doing research until I can see these craft in a museum. I'm not going to give up.
I'm with you on that. We should continue doing shows on this. I hope we can do more, because we just got to get it out there, haven't we? And the more that people are aware of it, hopefully something will come together and revelation will happen.
Yes, it will. It's going to be a different world. I truly believe that at some point we're going to have open official contact, and we're going to have disclosure, whether it's the US government or England or Canada or Brazil or some other method.
The people.
Yeah, it's gonna happen, and we're gonna be welcome to the galactic community, and we're gonna know for sure we're not alone. I look forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much, Preston. It was brilliant.
Hey, thank you.